So the material in offshoring developed from a mutual recognition by the Big E teaching team and the strategy teaching team that there was a gap in the curriculum, that we were not covering in the required curriculum the phenomenon of offshoring. We also had to come up with some assessment of how big a phenomenon is this. There are many assessments out there. We stumbled upon particularly a very interesting paper by Alan Blinder, a Princeton economist, in which he went through 800 occupations in the U.S. economy and rated each one on its potential offshoreability. We realized that we could simply make that an exhibit in the case, but that would have very little impact. And we got the idea that perhaps we could actually have much greater impact if the students themselves recreated Alan Blinder's exercise through an online computer application. And that's what we did. We had a technology that was provided by ETG and allowed us to collectively, across the class of 2009, recreate the research. The exercise was as follows, that each learning team, and there are 152 of them, each learning team would receive information online about 20 occupations, and they would be asked to respond to each occupation in two ways. First, they would assess on a particular scale the offshoreability of that occupation, and they'd receive lots of information online about the occupation so that they can make that assessment in an intelligent way. For those jobs that they rated as potentially quite offshoreable, they were then asked, which country will this job potentially go to? And they had a list of candidate countries that were countries they'd studied or would study in Big E. Once the student learning teams had made those assessments, we then were able to compile across the entire class some data on the offshoreability of each occupation. One thing the students were able to see very readily from looking at their individual team assessments, as well as the aggregate assessments across the class, was that the jobs that were being offshored or that were likely to be offshoreable were not simply low-end manufacturing jobs. They weren't just call center jobs. They were jobs that our students would be interested in. And I think for many of them, this was a wake-up call to recognize that it's not simply someone else whose job's at stake. Makes this a much more personal experience. Now, the technology, in a sense, was a sideshow. The wonderful thing about ETG is they made it a sideshow, right? It was not the central focus of our concern. We were confident that it was going to work. It was essential for us achieving our teaching objectives. But it was very smooth delivery because, the folks over at ETG did a great job.